Alright, let's be honest. You spent 20, maybe $30 on that fresh spool of premium, 100% fluorocarbon line. The package promised you it was virtually invisible to fish. You spooled it on your spinning reel feeling like a ninja, ready to fool the wariest bass in the lake. So you get out there on a beautiful sunny day, the water is crystal clear, and you can't buy a bite. Why are the fish acting like you just threw a garden hose in the water? Well, what if I told you that invisible line is casting a big dark shadow on the bottom, screaming danger to every fish in the area? Today, we're exposing the lie you've been sold about fluorocarbon. By the end of this video, you are going to see your fishing line in a completely new light, and more importantly, you'll understand what the fish are seeing. This one little detail could be the single reason your catch rate plummets on those perfect bluebird sky days. So, I have to ask, and I want you to be honest in the comments, have you always believed that fluorocarbon is completely invisible? For decades, the fishing industry has drilled one thing into our heads. If you want to be stealthy, you need fluorocarbon. The marketing is brilliant, really. They talk about the refractive index being almost identical to water. They show us underwater shots where the line just seems to disappear. And we bought it, hook, line, and sinker. We spend a fortune on realistic lures, silent trolling motors, and sunglasses that let us see into the water, all in the name of stealth. The fluorocarbon leader became the final, crucial piece of that puzzle. It became an unquestioned truth in the fishing community. You go to a tackle shop and ask what to use in clear water, and 99% of the time, they'll hand you a spool of fluoro. It's an automatic muscle memory decision for millions of anglers. We tie it on without a second thought, completely confident that we have an invisible connection to our lure. But we've been so focused on the line itself, we forgot to look at what it does to the environment around it. We forgot to look down. Let's start with the big lie we all bought into. Think about the last time you bought a spool of fluorocarbon. What did the packaging say? It probably had words like invisible, stealth, or disappears underwater. The ads in fishing magazines show a shimmering line vanishing into a pristine blue background. We have been conditioned, year after year, through millions of dollars in marketing, to believe in this idea of a true invisibility cloak for our bait. It's a powerful and appealing message because it offers a simple solution to a complex problem: how to trick a fish that has evolved over millennia to spot predators and danger. This message is so effective that many anglers feel like they are at a disadvantage if they don't use it. The problem is, this marketing message focuses on only one half of the story, the way light passes through the line. It conveniently ignores the other half, the light that doesn't pass through it. We've been trained to look at the line, but we should have been looking at the shadow it leaves behind. It's a classic magic trick, making you look at one hand while the other one does the work. The industry sold us on a feature, but never warned us about the massive side effect. So let's clear this up. It's not really about invisibility, it's about refraction. That's the sciencey word the marketing guys love to use. All it means is that light bends when it passes from one medium to another, like from water into your fishing line. Because fluorocarbon material has a refractive index very close to water, it doesn't bend the light as much as, say, monofilament. This means it distorts the view behind it less, making it harder to pick out in the water column. Think of it like this. Imagine putting a clear glass rod into a bucket of water. Is it invisible? No, of course not. You can still see it. But it looks warped and is much harder to see than it would be in the air. That's fluorocarbon. It's less apparent, it's harder for the fish to see, but it is not, by any stretch of the imagination, truly invisible. It is still a solid object displacing water, and more importantly, blocking light. And that is the key detail that we are going to focus on. Believing in total invisibility is the first mistake. Understanding it's just less visible is the first step to becoming a smarter angler. Now, let's introduce the real villain of this story, the shadow. This is the game changer, the aha moment that the marketing departments hope you never have. While the line itself may be difficult for a fish to see head-on, it is still a physical object. It is a dense, solid cylinder of material. And what happens when a solid object gets between a light source, like the sun, and a surface, like the bottom of the lake? It blocks the light. It casts a shadow. It doesn't matter how invisible the object itself is. A clean pane of glass will cast a shadow. A bottle of crystal clear water will cast a shadow. And your $20 spool of fluorocarbon will absolutely cast a shadow. This shadow is often a thin but surprisingly dark line that moves across the bottom. And while a fish might have trouble focusing on the transparent line itself, it has zero trouble seeing a dark shape moving unnaturally across its territory. The shadow is the giveaway. It's the Achilles heel of fluorocarbon, and it's something that most of us have never, ever considered. For this shadow to become a real problem, you need a perfect storm of conditions. And unfortunately, these are the exact conditions where we are told to use fluorocarbon in the first place. The two main ingredients are a high, bright sun and clear water. Let's talk about the sun first. When the sun is directly overhead, around midday, its rays are penetrating the water at a steep, direct angle. This creates the sharpest, darkest, and most defined shadows. It's just like your own shadow on the pavement at noon. It's short, dark, and follows you everywhere. Now, add in clear water. The clearer the water, the more light penetrates to the bottom, and the more contrast there is between the sunlit bottom and the shadow cast by your line. In stained or muddy water, the light is diffused and scattered, so shadows are weak or non-existent. But in that beautiful gin clear water, where you can see 15 feet down, that shadow is on full display. So the very scenario where you think your fluorocarbon gives you the biggest advantage is actually the scenario where its biggest weakness is most exposed. Let's take a moment and just visualize this from the fish's perspective. I want you to picture it. You're out on the water. It's 11:30 in the morning, not a single cloud in the sky. The sun is beating down. You're fishing a shallow, sandy flat, maybe in 5 or 6 feet of water. The kind of spot where you can see every rock, every piece of weed, every shell on the bottom. Now you make a cast. Your lure settles to the bottom. As you start your retrieve, dragging that Carolina rig or that shaky head, a thin, dark, perfectly straight line starts moving across that bright sandy bottom. It moves at a steady, unnatural pace. It's completely alien to this environment. Everything else is stationary or moving with the current, but this dark line is moving with purpose. To a wary bass or a spooky trout, what does that look like? It looks like a threat. It's a sign of something on the surface, a predator. It's the visual equivalent of someone dragging their fingernails across a chalkboard. It's just wrong, and it leads directly to your perfectly presented lure. Now, you don't need a degree in physics to understand the science here. Let's do the fisherman's edition of how a shadow works. Anything that blocks light creates a shadow. Simple as that. A completely opaque object, like braided line, blocks 100% of the light. It casts a very dark, very obvious shadow. Now, fluorocarbon isn't opaque, it's translucent. This means some light does pass through it. However, the line is a round cylindrical shape. This shape acts like a lens, and it bends and scatters a lot of the light that hits it, rather than letting it pass straight through. The result is that the area directly underneath the line receives significantly less light than the area around it. This difference in light creates the shadow. The key here is contrast. On a bright bottom, the human eye, and more importantly the fish's eye, is incredibly good at picking up on these differences in light and shadow. It's a survival instinct. Predators use shadows to hunt, and prey use shadows to hide. An unnatural shadow moving through their space is a massive red flag that is impossible for them to ignore. So, the big question is, do fish really care? Is a thin little shadow really that spooky? The answer is an emphatic yes. Think about the world a fish lives in. It is a world of constant threat from above. Herons, ospreys, eagles, cormorants, all of them hunt from the sky. A fish's brain is hardwired to be terrified of shadows moving on the surface or on the bottom. A shadow means death from above. So when your line casts a shadow that moves across the bottom, you are simulating the presence of an overhead predator. You're not just presenting a lure, you're presenting it with a terrifying announcement that a predator is here. This is especially true for fish in shallow, clear water, who are the most vulnerable and therefore the most cautious. That shadow might as well be a flashing neon sign that says danger. A fish in that situation will either flee immediately or it will lock down and refuse to bite, no matter how appealing your lure is. You are unintentionally triggering its deepest survival instinct. One of the biggest factors that determines how bad this shadow problem is the diameter of your line. It's simple, really. A thicker line blocks more light, and therefore it casts a bigger, darker, and more noticeable shadow. That 20-pound test fluorocarbon leader you use for throwing big swim baits for pike in clear water? On a sunny day, that thing is casting a shadow that looks like a rope. Even dropping down to a 12 or 15-pound test for bass fishing can create a surprisingly distinct shadow. This is where the obsession with using the heaviest line possible really comes back to bite you. You might think you're being safe, preventing break-offs, but you could be cutting your bites by 50% or more without even knowing it. Every single thousandth of an inch you add to your line's diameter is making that shadow more pronounced. On the flip side, this also means that going lighter can have a huge positive impact. The difference in the shadow between a 10-pound line and a 6-pound line is massive. It's a trade-off between strength and stealth, but now you know that stealth isn't just about the line itself, but also its shadow. The time of day you're fishing, and specifically the angle of the sun, changes everything. Think about it. In the early morning or late evening, the sun is low on the horizon. The light enters the water at a very shallow angle. This does a couple of things. First, a lot of the light reflects off the surface. Second, the light that does penetrate the water is scattered and diffused. This creates soft, long, and faint shadows. In these low light conditions, the shadow from your fluorocarbon line is much less of a problem. It's barely visible, if at all. But as the sun climbs higher in the sky, towards noon, the game completely changes. The sun's rays are now hitting the water almost perpendicular to the surface. This is when light penetration is at its maximum, and shadows are at their sharpest and darkest. Midday, from about 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on a clear day, is prime time for casting a spooky shadow. So what does this mean for you? It means you might want to change your tactics based on the time of day. Your fluorocarbon leader is much stealthier at sunrise than it is at high noon. What about when you're fishing in deeper water? Does the shadow still matter? This is a great question, and the answer is, it matters less. As you go deeper in the water column, the shadow effect starts to diminish significantly. This is because water isn't perfectly clear, even on the clearest lakes. There are tiny suspended particles everywhere. As sunlight travels down through the water, it hits these particles and scatters in all directions. The deeper it goes, the more it scatters. This diffused light softens shadows, making them fuzzier and less distinct. By the time you get down to 20, 30, or 40 feet, there is so much light scattering that a sharp shadow from a thin fishing line is basically impossible. The problem is most severe in what I would call the danger zone, water that is roughly 15 feet deep or less. This is where a huge amount of fishing happens, especially for bass, trout, and walleye during certain times of the year. So if you're drop-shotting on a deep hump, you probably don't need to worry. But if you're pitching jigs to shallow cover, you absolutely do. Another huge piece of this puzzle is the bottom composition. The type of lake bed you're fishing over makes a massive difference in how visible that shadow is. A shadow is all about contrast. So, where is a dark line going to be most visible? On a bright, uniform-colored bottom. A clean sand flat is the absolute worst-case scenario. The shadow will stick out like a sore thumb against that pale background. A light-colored gravel or marl bottom is also highly problematic. However, if you're fishing over a dark bottom, like mud or dark rock, the shadow will naturally blend in much better because there is less contrast. And the best-case scenario? A bottom that is covered in weeds or complex rock structures. In these environments, there are already thousands of natural shadows being cast by the weeds and rocks. The shadow from your fishing line simply gets lost in all that visual noise. It becomes perfectly camouflaged. This gives you a powerful strategic choice. On a bright sunny day, you might be better off targeting fish in weedy areas or on dark bottoms, rather than trying to fool them on an exposed sandy flat. Now, I know some of you might be thinking this all sounds a bit theoretical, so I want to give you a simple test you can do yourself. You don't need any special equipment. The next time you're out on a bright sunny day, just go to the shallowest, clearest water you can find, the edge of a boat ramp, a dock, or just wading in from the shore. Take your rod and strip out 10 or 15 feet of your fluorocarbon line. Let it sink a foot or two under the surface over a light-colored bottom. Now just look. Look for the shadow. I promise you, you will see it. Move your rod tip back and forth, and watch that thin, dark line dance across the sand or gravel. You will be shocked at how clear and defined it is. It is not a myth. It's not some advanced concept. It's plain as day, right there for you to see with your own eyes. Once you see it for yourself, you can never unsee it. And you will start thinking about where that shadow is on every single cast you make in shallow water for the rest of your life. Go ahead and try it. It's a real eye-opener. This naturally leads to the question, if fluorocarbon casts a shadow, isn't monofilament even worse? Or what about braid? Let's break it down. Braided line is the worst offender by far. It is completely opaque, so it blocks all the light and casts the darkest, most obvious shadow possible. Plus, the line itself is highly visible in the water. So, using straight braid in clear, shallow water on a sunny day is a terrible idea. Now, what about monofilament? Mono is more visible in the water than fluoro because its refractive index is further from water's. It also casts a shadow that is very similar to the shadow from fluorocarbon of the same diameter. The critical difference, and the reason we're focusing on fluoro, is the expectation of stealth. We use fluorocarbon specifically because we believe it is invisible. We pay a premium for it. We are using it in the most demanding, high-visibility situations. The problem with fluorocarbon isn't that it casts a shadow. It's that it casts a shadow when we have been led to believe we have achieved total invisibility. It's about the betrayal of that promise, and how it leads us to make poor tactical decisions on the water. Nowhere does this shadow problem hurt more than in the world of finesse fishing. Think about techniques like the drop shot, the shaky head, the Ned rig, or a wacky-rigged Senko. The entire philosophy behind these techniques is to be subtle, natural, and super stealthy to trigger bites from highly pressured or negative fish. We use light line, small hooks, and natural-looking baits. We are obsessed with making the presentation look as non-threatening as possible. And then what do? We present that perfectly subtle bait with a big, scary, unnatural shadow leading right to it. It completely undermines the entire effort. Imagine a super wary smallmouth bass in 20 feet of crystal clear water looking at your drop shot bait. The bait is hovering there, looking alive, but then he sees this dark line moving along the bottom, connected to another line going straight up. It's like a puppet show. The fish sees the strings. The illusion of a natural, free-floating meal is shattered. You might as well be using a steel cable. This shadow is the mortal enemy of true finesse fishing. Let's use a specific case study to really drive this home. The wary smallmouth bass. Anglers who target trophy smallmouth in clear water systems, like the Great Lakes or Northern Shield Lakes, know that these fish are incredibly intelligent and have amazing eyesight. They are notorious for following a lure all the way back to the boat, only to turn away at the last second. Why do they do that? Because they spotted something that wasn't right. On a bright sunny day over a gravel or sand flat where these fish love to feed, your line's shadow is a massive red flag. A big smallmouth didn't get big by being stupid. It is constantly scanning its environment for both food and danger. An unnatural moving shadow signals danger every single time. You could have the most realistic crayfish or goby imitation ever made, but if it has a shadow leading the way, that educated fish will not commit. This is why on some days you get a lot of followers but no bites. They are intrigued by the lure but spooked by the shadow. Here's another perfect example. Fishing in a gin-clear trout stream. This is perhaps the most demanding environment for stealth in all of freshwater fishing. Trout, especially in heavily fished rivers, are ridiculously spooky. They spend their entire lives looking up, watching for insects to drift by. Their eyesight is phenomenal. They can spot a clumsy angler on the bank from 50 feet away. Now, imagine you're drifting a nymph through a clear, shallow run on a sunny afternoon. As your line drifts over a feeding trout, its shadow passes through the fish's field of vision. To that trout, it looks just like the shadow of a predatory bird's beak or a heron's leg. The fish's reaction is instantaneous. It either darts for cover or simply stops feeding, sometimes for an hour or more. You just put the entire pool on high alert. Fly fishermen have known about this for a long time, which is why they obsess over long, delicate leaders and casting angles that keep the line away from the fish. But for gear anglers, it's a lesson we need to take to heart. In a trout stream, your shadow is just as important as your lure. Okay, so we've established the problem. Your line is casting a shadow and it's spooking fish. What can you do about it? Let's talk about solutions, because this isn't about telling you to stop using fluorocarbon. It's about using it smarter. Solution number 1 is all about timing. If you know you're going to be fishing shallow, clear water on a bright sunny day, you need to treat midday as the danger zone. Plan your day around the low light periods. The first 2 hours after sunrise and the last 2 hours before sunset are your prime time. During these windows, the low angle of the sun will make your line's shadow a complete non-issue. You get all the benefits of fluorocarbon's low visibility without the massive downside of the shadow. You should focus your efforts on those shallow exposed flats during these low light periods. Then, when the sun gets high and the shadows get sharp, it's time to make a change. Being a great angler is about adapting to the conditions, and the position of the sun is one of the most important conditions there is. When you find yourself stuck in that midday danger zone with a high sun, what do? The answer is solution number 2, change your location. If the fish on the shallow sand flats won't bite, it's time to leave them alone. You have 2 primary options. Your first option is to move deeper. Start targeting fish on deeper structure, humps, points and ledges in 15, 25 or even 35 feet of water. As we discussed, once you get deep enough, the light is so scattered that your shadow is no longer a factor. Your fluorocarbon line becomes a pure advantage again. Your second option is to stay shallow, but find a different type of cover or bottom. Instead of fishing that exposed sand flat, move to a thick weed bed or a dark rocky shoreline. Find areas where the bottom is visually complex. In these spots, the shadow of your line will be camouflaged by all the natural shadows cast by the weeds and rocks. The fish won't be able to pick it out. Don't keep banging your head against the wall trying to force a bite where the conditions are working against you. Move and find a place where your presentation can be truly stealthy. The third, and perhaps most immediate solution, is to make a change to your terminal tackle, specifically your line. This is where you need to be honest with yourself about how heavy your line really needs to be. The simple rule is this: go as light as you can possibly get away with for the situation. If you're fishing in open water with few snags for 3-pound bass, do you really need a 12-pound leader? Or can you get the job done with 6 or 8-pound test? Making that change will dramatically reduce the profile and intensity of the shadow you're casting. It could be the single most important adjustment you make all day. This requires confidence in your drag system and your ability to play a fish, but the reward is more bites, period. This is the essence of finesse fishing. It's not just about the lure, it's about the entire system. And in shallow, clear water, the thinnest possible line is your best friend. Sacrificing a little bit of breaking strength could be exactly what you need to gain a whole lot more hookups. So, what's the final lesson here? It's that we need to completely rethink what invisibility means in fishing. We need to graduate from the marketing hype and start thinking like the fish. Fluorocarbon is not an invisibility cloak. It is a tool, a fantastic tool, with a very specific set of strengths and a very specific set of weaknesses. Its strength is its low visibility within the water column. Its weakness is the shadow it casts in bright light and shallow water. Understanding this doesn't mean you should throw all your fluoro in the trash. It means you should become a more strategic angler. It means you start thinking in 3 dimensions. You start considering the sun's position as much as you consider the wind direction. You start choosing your fishing spots not just based on where the fish should be, but on where your presentation will be the most effective and least threatening. It's about adding another layer of critical thinking to your approach. The best anglers aren't the ones with the most expensive gear, but the ones who understand its limitations. So, let's wrap this all up. The single biggest takeaway from all of this is that your expensive, invisible fluorocarbon line is, in fact, casting a shadow. And on those beautiful, bright, sunny days in shallow, clear water, that shadow is potentially screaming danger to every fish you're trying to catch. The oh wow moment here, the real pivot in thinking, is that for years we've been obsessed with the line itself, when the real enemy to our stealth has been the shadow it creates on the bottom. This changes things because it forces you to be a more complete angler. It's no longer enough to just tie on a good lure. Now, you have to think like a hunter, considering the position of the sun, the clarity of the water, the depth you're fishing, and the color of the bottom. It forces you to be more strategic about when and where you fish. Thank you so much for watching and for being willing to challenge some old school fishing wisdom with me. If this video gave you an aha moment, do me a favor and hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next video. Now, for the final question, and I really want to hear from you on this. Now that you know about the shadow, are you going to change how you use fluorocarbon? Or do you think this is all just overthinking it? Let me know your honest opinion in the comments below. I read every single one.